During World War II, thousands of crimes against humanity took place, from experiment on humans to mass slaughters. Today, we will explore one of the most infamous events that the Allied forces had to endure, the Bataan Death March. In July of 1941, the Allied forces that included the United States and the Philippines were tasked with holding and denying access to the Manila Bay against the Japanese forces. This plan was known as War Plan Orange 3. It stated that the Philippine garrison was to hold the entrance to the bay, and if the enemy prevailed, the Americans were to hold back the Japanese advance while withdrawing to the Bataan Peninsula. But by the end of that month, General Douglas MacArthur rejected War Plan Orange and suggested a more aggressive course of action. He recommended, amongst other things, a coastal defense strategy, with the forces ordered to hold the beaches to prevent the Japanese invasion. On December 22, 1941, the Japanese 14th Army, commanded by General Masaharu Homma, landed on the beaches and swiftly took control. By the end of the day, the Japanese forces had secured nearly all of their objectives and were in position for an attack inland. The next day, General MacArthur reverted back to War Plan Orange 3, abandoning his own plan, and the forces withdrew back to the Bataan Peninsula. The Battle of Bataan began on January 7, 1942, and continued until April. After months of vicious fighting, the commander of the United States forces in the Far East, Major General Edward P. King, surrendered to the Japanese 14th Army. With the Allied surrender, it became clear to the Japanese that they had encountered almost twice as many captives as their original estimates, with more than 60,000 starved, sick, and wounded prisoners of war, and over 38,000 equally weakened civilians who had been caught up in the battle. On April 9, 1942, the transfer of captives began. The march was estimated to take 5 days, starting at Mariveles on the Bataan Peninsula to the San Fernando railhead, finally reaching Camp O'Donnell, though some waves of captives took up to 10 days to travel the estimated 65 miles. During the march, prisoners received little to no food and water. They were subjected to severe physical abuse, including forms of torture. The sun treatment was all too common, as some men were forced to strip naked to bake in the extreme sunlight, with temperatures reaching over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Trucks drove over some of those who fell due to fatigue, and cleanup crews killed those too weak to continue. Prisoners were randomly stabbed or beaten during the marches. Upon arrival to the San Fernando railhead, prisoners were placed in overcrowded boxcars with at least 100 prisoners each. Temperatures reached more than 110 degrees Fahrenheit in the unventilated boxcars, and disease spread rapidly. Tales of survivors recount the conditions in the trains, with some stating that the overcrowded conditions did not allow anyone to sit down. So, if someone died or passed out, they were simply held up by other prisoners. Upon arrival to the Capos train station, prisoners were forced to march another 9 miles to Camp O'Donnell. Survivors continued to die at rates to up to several hundred per day. Since bodies were buried in mass graves throughout the march and poor accountability of prisoners kept by the Japanese, exact number of deaths and survivors is unknown. Some estimates state that as many as 20,000 American and Filipinos died during the marches. More conservative calculations suggest that 600 to 650 American deaths and 5,000 to 10,000 Filipinos died in the march. Upon completion of the march, conditions for the POWs did not get better. The conditions on Camp O'Donnell were very primitive. The POWs lived in bamboo huts, sleeping on the bamboo floor, often without any covering. There was no plumbing and water was scarce. Weakened by malaria, dysentery was rampant. Medicine was in short supply, and food consisted of rice and vegetable soup. The consequences of the hardships were thousands of POW deaths. Filipino deaths were much higher in number and percentages. As many as 20,000 Filipinos died. For the Americans, the deadliest period was at the end of May, with more than 40 soldiers dying each day. The number of Americans who died at Camp O'Donnell is not precisely known, with an estimated about 1,500 recorded deaths. Camp O'Donnell was eventually recaptured by the United States on January 30, 1945, and later that same year, World War II would come to an end. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to follow here for more history.